Hey viewers, my name's Cara. I'm your host for Tuesdays here on the Pagan Perspective. And this week we are doing what to me feels like a relatively nice and simple, back to our roots, back to basics kind of topic here compared to the stuff I've been talking about on my personal channel and in my personal life and on my social media and the kind of stuff that I have coming up on my own channel and stuff, which is which is this week on Pagan Perspective, we're talking about our relationship with the elements. This is actually a dual team member suggested topic here because Tim, one of our new substitute hosts, suggested this topic, which is in the description and is written as follows. Which element/elements do you feel the most affinity with, and how does this affect your practice? One of the other remaining team member suggested topics from last year that was still on our list, because we had a bunch of them and I just kind of pepper them in throughout when we need to fill in some topics, or I like to start a month with a team member suggested topic when we have enough of them. And right now, of course, we have so many viewer suggested topics to last us the entire rest of this year. So we might be doing less of the team member topics, or they might still be in there just because I like to mix it up and have the team suggest some things too. But there were a lot left over from last year that we didn't get to, and one of those that was still left over was simply, what is your take on the elements? So keeping both of those in mind this week, Tim's question was, which element or elements do we feel the most affinity with, and how does that affect our practice? Which I think is a brilliantly worded question, by the way, and something really wonderful for all of us to dig into in our different ways from our different perspectives. And then the broader topic, what is our take on the elements, if we want to talk about that this week too. This week, I have a little bit of shadow over here because I'm just doing natural light, and it's Northeast Ohio, it's early April, and it's technically spring, and we had some very springy days, but then we just had snow again. So this is the natural light in the afternoon, so sorry if you can't see as well or if it seems a little off. That's what I'm doing this week. I don't feel like turning on artificial lights. So the other note I wanted to mention, I put this in the topic for anyone on the channel. If any of our paths do not incorporate the elements in any way, I have encouraged us to talk about why, or if there is something similar in our practice that we do use, or if we don't use anything like this at all. And I bring this up because in the past on Pagan Perspective, we have had some members whose paths really didn't involve any work with the elements in any form. I'm not sure if that still applies to anyone who's currently on the team. We may all have some kind of take on the elements and what it has to do with our practice, or what they have to do with our practice. But I just wanted to add that note in there because in the past we have had members who don't have anything to do with the elements in their path. And just because all of us may have something to say about it, I just want to note to everyone out there watching and listening that not everyone who identifies as pagan or neo-pagan or a practitioner of magic, not everyone necessarily incorporates the elements into their practice. So that's not something that we should just simply take for granted. Now that I've given you a nice long intro to this topic, my response. My elements that I feel the most affinity with. All right, I'm going to give you a little bit of a Reader's Digest version of how this has sort of progressed throughout my path. There are probably older videos on this channel and on my channel where I've talked about the elements, because this is definitely a nice basic topic that has most likely been covered before, maybe even multiple times. And over the past 10 years, since I've started doing videos on YouTube, my views on a lot of things have changed. The elements are something, the 4 classical elements, as we may call them, and that's what you would Google or look up on Wikipedia to find this use of the elements, where we're talking about earth, air, fire, and water. That's typically what they're called, the classical elements. because of course then we have the periodic table of elements, which are all of the other individual elements. Earth, air, fire, and water are a much more alchemical or symbolic representation of the building blocks of all life. If you want to get really technical about it, that's where you go into the periodic table of elements that we learn in school. But the concept of the elements, earth, air, fire, and water, that I have always used in my practice is just that they are kind of like the building blocks of magic. They're symbolically the building blocks of life. Each one of them represents a different aspect of our lives and a different aspect of approaching things, you could say. So what I'm talking about is that for me, they also represent, air represents the mental aspects of our lives. Fire represents the spiritual aspects of our lives, water is emotional, and earth is physical. And there are obviously a whole host of associations that go along with all of these things. There are also different elements, different practices within magic that are where we get the name of sort of the basic introductory class in the reclaiming tradition of witchcraft. Is called Elements of Magic. There's also a brand new book edited by Jane Meredith and Gade Parma on the Elements of Magic in the reclaiming tradition. That book is out now if you're interested in getting that. I have not yet acquired my own copy of it, but I'm very much looking forward to it. And that deals with the different types of magic that we do within each different realm. So air having to do with the mental aspects of our lives, so thought, clarity, also having to do with communication, speech. Fire having to do with our will and our creativity and our passion. Earth having to do with our physical body and our physical health, and also physical pursuits, actually doing things, actually making things with our hands. Spell crafting, actually like crafting spells and enchanting physical objects and things like that. And obviously working with things from the earth, such as crystals, herbs, other plants, things like that, other stones that aren't crystals. And water, having to do with emotional things, also to me represents divination and trance work and trance journeying and stuff like that, as Starhawk and Hilary Valentine mention in the book The 12 Wild Swans, also a reclaiming text. Trance is sometimes referred to as the long journey over water, and so they equate that with water. So that's kind of a basic overview of what it is to me. When I was starting my path consciously in my practice, when I was like 11, 12, 13 years old, somewhere around there, my sun sign is Leo. And Leo is a fire element. So that's how the elements have a place in astrology with the zodiac, because there are 12 signs of the zodiac, 4 elements, 3 zodiac signs are assigned to each element, and they rotate. So right now we're in Aries season. Happy Aries season to any of you Aries out there. We are about to transition into Taurus season. But so Aries is a fire sign, and then you have Taurus, which is an earth sign. Cancer is a water sign. Gemini is an air sign. Then Cancer is a water sign, followed by Leo, fire, Virgo, earth, and so on and so forth. And it rotates fire, earth, air, water, fire, earth, air, water, fire, earth, air, water through the 12 zodiac signs. So that is something that is involved in my practice as well, and the astrology and zodiac and blah, blah, blah. So when I was first starting on my path, I'm a Leo, I am a fire sign, and I didn't know that much in depth about other aspects of astrology at the time. So to me, the most important one, and really the only one that I knew anything about, was our sun sign. You know, it's like your personality and who you are. And so to me, growing up, I always thought like, I'm a fire sign, like fire is my element, and I was all about fire. So a lot of my early spells were candle magic and had to do with campfires and bonfires, because that was always like a big tradition for my family over the summer, having lots of bonfires, lots of campfires. And so I always felt a very close connection and affinity with fire, and I loved it. And I just felt like, yeah, this is my element, and that's who I am. And there were always a few like odd things, because when I was like, again, like 12, and I was first starting to look up the basics of palmistry, for example, your hand and your palm also are attached or associated with an element, one of these classical elements. I also meant to note earlier that not only will some pagan paths not have anything to do with the concept of the elements, and a lot of us will be talking about these classical elements of earth, air, fire, and water, but some people might also be using other systems of elements and other cultures' takes on the elements, such as the Chinese system, which includes wood and metal as two of the elements, which we do not within the classical element system. Anyway, in palmistry, your palm is also associated with an element, and I'm not a professional palm reader or anything, but whenever I looked through all the various sources, and you look at your hand and it's based on the shape of your hand and the shape of your fingers, and I was always like, I don't know, it seems like my palm is air, and I was like really confused by this as a kid, okay? Because I was like, what, fire is my element, everything is fire, I'm all about fire, how can my palm be air? Like, that's so crazy. It really felt like a small identity crisis to me as a kid. Well, later I learned about moon signs and ascendant signs and, all of the other signs in your birth chart. Like, the sun sign is just one thing. And it turns out my moon sign is an air sign. My ascendant is a water sign. There's all these different things. Your Venus sign, your Mars sign, Jupiter, all the different planets and what signs they're in, and then what signs are in your different houses. Like, there's so much more to it that I did not know when I first started my path. So when I first started my path, I very much was like, fire, fire, fire. And I still have that little connection to fire, of course. But as I grew up and I learned more, then I started realizing a lot about my personality traits and the things where you would kind of be like, oh, this about your personality equates to this element. A lot of it was fire and air, and then a little bit of that water, because again, like, my ascendant was water, but I never felt, is water, but I never felt very much connection with water. I don't swim. I can't swim. I've tried learning. No judgment, please. Maybe one day, but there's a lot of, I was never taught as a child, and there's a lot of psychological stuff that comes into it once you're an adult and you try to learn something that's potentially very dangerous. But I never really felt that much of a desire for it. I don't feel that connected to it. Like, my favorite being in water was that I had a hot tub at my house growing up. Like, that was the best thing ever. That was my affinity with water right there, was hot tub. And I still love taking baths, and I love the idea of ritual baths and healing springs and all this type of stuff. So now, today, I have more of a connection with water, but I never did as a kid. And so I would say probably around my late teenage years, like a couple years before I started on YouTube, I really developed this concept that, like, I was starting to realize more that it's really about balance, and that these four elements represent multiple different aspects of all of our lives. And that, yes, we may have an affinity for one or two, or there might be some that are more prevalent at different points in our lives, anything like that. But I really started to see them as indicators of different things going on in my life, and that, similar to the chakra system, if we were in balance, then they would all be equally present, and they would all be equally influencing my life. So I started to see moments where I was feeling really heavy on one element and really disconnected from another element as an imbalance, and something that I should seek to balance back out. And so if I felt like, oh, I'm being really extra fiery today, sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes we want that, right? Sometimes we want a certain energy for a certain goal, and so we bring in all of that energy that's going to help us attain that goal. Maybe it is fire and air. And then we let the other two kind of hang out because we're not using them actively at that time. They're still there, they're still present. We never fully get rid of them, but we allow ourselves to focus on some more than others because we need that energy more at the time. But then when that's not the case, we need to even it back out, so you have to actively bring those other elements back in to balance them out. I want to show you something. So this is me being a crafty witch, an arts and craftsy witch, not just the craft witch. Back at winter solstice, the Vegan Pagans of Ohio group, we got together for winter solstice and made little ornaments made from colored craft popsicle sticks that you can find at like the dollar store. And so this is one of the crafts that we had available, and it was at a library, and people from the public could come in and learn about the elements and learn about winter solstice and make these and take them home. And so I absolutely loved it, and I bought myself a package at the dollar store and made a bunch of these. So this is my little like elemental pentagram. So we have one of each color. But there's a fifth one, of course, because in the system of the classical elements, we have the fifth element, which is known as spirit or akasha, or could be considered mystery. There's many, 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 many things. And my relationship with that has also changed over the years too, but that would take a whole other like 5 minutes to tell you. So basically, I'll just skip to what it is now, which is that when the other 4 elements are present, when earth, air, fire, and water are all present, spirit is also necessarily there. It is something that comes out of the union and the balance of the other 4 and the presence of the other 4. So there's this. And then I also made each individual element its own little alchemical symbol, which these are the alchemical symbols of the elements. We might also just think of them as, the triangle ones. That's how I describe it to people a lot. So this is air, which we usually remember like a mnemonic device. And I made it yellow because to me, yellow is associated with air and the east and the dawn, the rising sun. So yellow makes sense, or a golden color. I remember air as being like that the triangle looks like a mountain and the lines represent the cloud cover at the top of the mountain. So being high up in the air. I don't know, that's just how I heard it described once, and it makes sense to me. Fire is an upward pointing triangle with no line, so representing the flame of fire pointing up, and I made mine red. Water is the mirror opposite of fire. It's the downward facing triangle. You've also probably seen people use this symbol as a symbol for the feminine or the divine feminine, which is something else I'll talk about in a second, but this is water. I made it blue. And earth is the other receptive element, the downward facing element. So water and earth are receptive because they kind of look like cups, right? They look like something that you could put something else into. So they receive something. This is a pencil sharpener that happens to be shaped like a heart. So in magic, when we think of our magical tools, if you read tarot, when we think about water, it's associated with cups and the vessel. And so like the bowl of water that would be on your altar, the cups or chalices suit in tarot, that's water. And earth is also receptive. And this one, the sort of little memory device, is that it looks like you've taken a cone and dug it down or like stuck it down into the earth, and the line represents the ground. So that's how you can think of that. And I made this one green. So these are the colors that I associate with them in my practice. In other cultures and in other systems, they have totally different colors associated with them. There's also the fact that in tarot, sometimes fire and air are opposite of how some people use them in magic. So air is sometimes identified with the wand, like your tool on your altar, the wand, and fire is associated with your athame or sword or other type of blade. But in tarot, the air suit is the swords or blades, or whatever other kind of name they give to it, but it's the blades. And fire is the wands, rods, or staffs. So that's one thing to note, is that the tarot system is different than some people use for their magical system. But water is still cups, and earth in tarot is coins or pentacles, discs, things like that. Now, the other one I made, when you superimpose all of these, you put them all over top of one another, the bottom of the upward facing triangles overlapping this line here at the bottom of earth, coming in with our air, what do we get? An arts and crafts project. No, we get the hexagram, also sometimes recognized and seen as the Star of David in Judaism. This symbol in magic also represents the union of the 4 classical elements, because if you take those symbols, these ones, the triangles, and superimpose them and overlap them, this is what you get. And so spirit to me is represented by the color purple, or it could be white or clear or a whole rainbow. So actually I made another version of this in all of the colors of the rainbow. So, the colors that you use to associate with it are different, but I like rainbows. I have an affinity with rainbows. I feel like that symbolism speaks to me a lot. But so here I made the upward facing triangle, the projective one, out of the warm colors that are associated with air and fire, because those are the upward facing triangles. And I made the downward facing one out of the cool colors of the rainbow, the receptive elements, blue, green, and then the purple. Oop, yeah, and this actually isn't glued together, so you could do this. So it's almost like a wood puzzle at this point. That's what it looks like when the elements are out of balance. And then bringing them together to make them more equal. There we go. So that's me being really arts and craftsy with my symbolism, and I put things like this on my altar all year now. I just made them at winter solstice, but I was like, they're not just ornaments for winter solstice. These are going to be used all the time. And so I actually made these because sometimes I like to have 4 different elemental altars in my home, or maybe if I ever do a workshop or I go to an event, I would put these on the different elemental altars. But anyway, so that's just something I like to do. And yeah, so I mentioned you might have seen this used as a symbol of the feminine or the divine feminine, which it is. And then similarly, this would be the masculine or the sacred masculine. I don't really use gendered terms for the elements anymore, but I wanted to note that here because I've been talking to some people about that. As I mentioned, I've been making videos on YouTube in general for about 10 years, and I definitely used to think of the elements more as the masculine elements and the female elements, because that's a lot of the teachings that were really put out there in a lot of books that were written earlier, and a lot of people still teach that today because that's their view of the world. But since my views on gender expression have changed a lot over the years, my views on sexuality have changed a lot over the years, and this is an issue that we are thinking more about, I have also learned other ways that different systems and traditions talk about the elements. And so I find talking about them as receptive and projective to be much easier and also more meaningful to me and my practice, because the elements are things that we all have within us. And so the receptive aspects are the things like being able to receive from the universe, and the things that are like more of our inner work and our self-care. And the projective elements are more what we do for the rest of the world. So that's the projective, what we project out into the world, our expression, this would be like our sun sign, how we express ourselves to the rest of the world, and the receptive energy, more like the moon, which again, those things have also been gendered throughout the history of different people's practice. So I wanted to mention those might be some terms that you hear people use. I don't personally like to use those terms anymore because to me, the elements don't have a gender. And that's something that human beings are really preoccupied with, is like putting ideas into boxes so that we can understand them better, so that it mirrors our lives better. But we're starting to realize that there's not just two genders, and it's not that black and white, right? We've always known that about magic too. And so I feel like while the polarity of balance of opposites exists, it's not cut and dry black and white, right? So you've got, or, wet and dry, black and white. There's a whole spectrum of things in between there. And so while polarity still definitely exists, light and dark, wet and dry, projective and receptive, I personally don't like to box those into gender specifications. So that's my take on the elements and a little bit of a background on my affinity with them. I don't know if I fully answered Tim's question. So before I wrap this up, we'll just probably make it an even half-hour video. I can't even believe I talked about the elements for half an hour, but it's so nice. It feels like such a good, fun, basic, back to basics topic. So I really needed this week. But I want to make sure I answered Tim's question. So that's how I used to feel about them, and I brought them all in, and I got to this point where I realized they're more like it's a balance and they should be balanced. So how does that affect my practice now? Do I feel more of an affinity with one or multiple now than with others? I do at given times, right? Like I said, I notice at different times if I need more of one energy, then I might focus on that more. Or it's the kind of thing where if I'm just going about my daily life and I feel like, wow, I feel really out of touch with Earth, then I will purposely do a little more work directly with Earth, such as, currently in my life, one of the biggest things I'm doing is sprouting seeds. I germinated seeds and I sprouted some seeds indoors. It's the first time I've actually remembered to start early enough to start my plants indoors to get ready for my garden. So this is some cucumber sprouts and bean sprouts. Oh my goodness gracious. They're like little trees. They're so nice. I also have some summer squash and radish sprouts sitting here next to me on the table. They're going to get put in pots later today. And I have a bunch of other little herbs, seedlings in a little tiny seed starter thing that are about maybe this tall. So that's something I've been doing that's really heavily in earth, right? And literally digging your hands into soil and into the earth and interacting directly with plants. So that's something I'm doing right now. And ultimately though, it's very important to me in my practice today, and has been for several years now, that I really view them as a balance. And if I'm going about my daily life and I feel out of balance with them or with one or the other, I ultimately try to keep that pretty well balanced and maintain a good relationship with all of them. So whereas 10 years ago, or more than 10 years ago, 15 years ago, because this Ostara was 15 years since my first Sabbath celebrated publicly with other people. My mom and a bunch of her friends who are also pagan and witchy people. My first Sabbath that was celebrated with other people and not just alone in my bedroom was Ostara 2004. So, is my math right? 2003, 2004? Whatever. I thought I did the math and it's been 15 years. I can't do the math right now. But, yeah, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Yeah, okay, cool. 15 years. Since then, back then, I really felt like fire, fire, fire. And now I'm like, I am everything. We are everything. Everything is us. Balance. the balance must be restored. So that's a reference to one of my favorite PC games. If you know what it is, let me know in the comments, because we need to talk about how great it is. I will see you guys next time. Until then, I would love to hear what elements you have more of an affinity with and what your take is on the elements. What system of the elements do you use in your practice, if you do, or if you don't? What do air and fire represent to you as far as the magical tools? Are you on the tarot side or the other type of magical tool system side? What colors do you associate with the elements? Because these four are definitely not the only ones, right? Green is earth, but brown is also earth. Black is also earth. You know, so there are multiple colors. This just happens to be the ones from the rainbow that I use to represent it, because again, I love the rainbow, and that's just one system of doing it. So let us know in the comments if you have any bits and pieces, aspects that differ from mine, differ from everybody else's. If you don't use the elements at all, that's cool too. Let us know if you do anything similar or not at all. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time. Until then, don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye.